We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
So just a heads up, just so that you beloveds don't think I'm like having a stroke or anything. My speech at this current present moment in time is slightly impaired. I'm not sure if you can hear it or notice it, but my lisp is slightly more pronounced. Someone actually tweeted the other day something along the lines of like, are you really gay if you don't have a lisp? And I was offended for obvious reasons, but also at the same time I was like, wow, I was deeply honored. So last week I had an appointment with the dentist and yo, bangane yo. Amen, amen, amen. The good news is that I'm recovering at an excellent pace. The bad news, the bad news is that when I went for my appointment last week, the dentist told me that I shouldn't speak for up to 10 days. And I was like, wait, what? That is absolutely wild. Never in your whole life. I mean, let's not even talk about the fact that I'm already on a diet of like butternut soup and purity. So how are you like going to expect me to not utter a word for up to 10 days? But also that just means that I'm not going to be able to make videos for up to 10 days. Do you know what that does to my schedule? Do you know what that does to my life? Like, that's such an oppressive expectation to have of me. So obviously, because I'm grown and I have a whole entire audience to entertain, I went ahead and I made this video because I mean, like, Beyonce doesn't stop. So why should I? Why should I? So in the making of this episode, I had to ask myself two very important questions. The first one being, what kind of an Uber passenger am I? My current Uber rating is 4.42, which is obviously not cum laude status, but I am definitely working on that. And then the second question I had to ask myself wasn't really a question, but it was more of like an existential reckoning of sorts for me. There was a concept that was important for me to engage, and that concept was safety. And no, when I'm talking safety, I'm not talking driver competence, arrive alive, fucking safety pill to win a sick driver. I'm talking about how a certain marker or certain markers of my identity can potentially determine the quality of my trip. But in the bigger scheme of things, determine the quality of my life in certain spaces. So this episode was inspired by an interesting and tense at times Uber trip that I had recently. So it's a Saturday, which means same-sex Saturday is a great day. So I whip up my phone, I request the Uber, but I arrange for the Uber to take me from my house to the Gau train station because it's just like cost effective like that. So I request the Uber and I take it for granted that the Uber will be like at my house in like 10 minutes. Lol, so the joke was on me because it actually turned out that my Uber driver was completing a trip 2 streets away from my house. Am I dressed? No. Am I fragranced? No. Have I eaten? No. Am I even lotioned, my boy? No. Am I a mess? Definitely. Anyway, I gather the few pieces of me that actually is ready and I climb into the Uber. So I climb into the Uber and my Uber driver gives me the, are you Rulani? And I give him the routine and uninspired, yes, I'm Rulani, because I know what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next is that he's going to ask me whether or not I bula bula. And then I'm going to respond, no, I don't know how to speak Tsonga. And then for the remainder of that 6.5 minute trip between my house and the Gau train station, he's going to continue steadfastly to speak Tsonga to me as if the aim of that trip is to have me being fully proficient in Tsonga by the time I walk into the station. So at some point during the trip, Brothers raises the volume of the radio, with my permission of course, because unlike some other public carriers, Uber drivers are polite, they're couth, and they have some decent conception of customer care. So we're listening to the radio and they happen to be talking about the film Inxeba, The Wound, which is a very important South African film that seeks to have an honest and necessary conversation about love, homosexuality, or queerness in the context of a certain cultural or traditional practice in South Africa. So a couple of the cast and crew members were being interviewed on air, and they were basically just taking the listener through the process, the joys, the trials, and the importance of making a film of this nature. And throughout the duration of that interview, my Uber driver kept making these like little snide comments like, ooh, wow, yeah, ne, like. So naturally, I'm getting nervous. And whenever I get nervous, I need to find something to distract me and keep me focused. So I look out the window, that doesn't help. And then I whip out my phone, and naturally I go to Twitter. So I'm just on Twitter and I'm laughing at everything on Twitter. I'm even laughing at tweets that are not even funny, but I have to keep my mind busy, you know what I mean? And then they discuss homophobia and the backlash that the film got as a result of the boycotts. And then my Uber driver was like,
Hey, these people must just die.
and I was like, so on the surface, right, I'm like cool, calm, and collected, as the sapiosexuals would say in their Twitter bios. But on the inside, I'm just like, okay, Mukeli. So at what point exactly do I get to jump out this moving Uber? So at this stage, my mind is in overdrive and my anxiety, my boy. Top floor, rooftop parking. That's where my anxiety is. So now I'm doing this like strange thing where I'm trying not to come across as like obviously gay to him, right? But I'm betrayed by everything about me in that moment, and in that moment I realize that it's impossible to escape me. I'm inescapable. And once I had that moment of realization, something within me, something that aligned in the cosmic universe, whatever it was, everything just aligned, that it made me want to go beyond the pretext and actually engage my Uber driver. Actually have the audacity to be like, and then what was that about? But unfortunately, there wasn't enough time to really engage him in the way that I wanted to engage him, because we were like 2 minutes away from the drop-off location. So in those 2 minutes, I decided to engage him, and I got a couple of things that were important for me, important enough for me to make this video today. The first thing I got from my conversation with him is that he noticed my discomfort. That was like mildly interesting for me, that he noticed that I was uncomfortable. When I say interesting, I really mean suspicious. Secondly, he disagreed and condemned the homophobic and queerphobic layered intimidation that was projected onto the film. But then his own position on queer people was ambiguous. It was ambiguous in a dismissive kind of way. Kind of like he wasn't even trying to have the conversation in the first place, or he regretted even engaging me on this issue, because I was going at him. Anyway, we pull up to the Gautrain station in Sandton, and I make a very, very quick exit from the Uber. Not because the trip made me feel uncomfortable or fearful in any kind of way. I made a quick exit from my Uber because I wasn't trying to be a casualty in the Uber and meet the taxi wars. So although my Uber trip was under 7 minutes, and I only got 2 minutes to really engage my Uber driver in conversation, there were so many things that happened and then didn't happen during the duration of that trip that I really want to talk about today. I'll chat about 2 of them. So the first thing I want to reflect on was really about me. That very intense moment of fight or flight sensation, I guess, that I felt when I felt uncomfortable and almost under siege by my Uber driver, and just being in that situation. So what I've come to know in my 23 years of being on this God-forsaken planet is that queerness doesn't come without conundrum, right? The conundrum being, the more I actualize myself as a queer being and using that process of actualization as a point of power and as a point from which I live a meaningful life, the more I also realize the ways in which my queerness puts me in a position that makes me prone to danger, right? So in the moment in which I felt threatened during that Uber trip, I decided to fight the threat by flighting the threat, if that makes sense. And how did I do that exactly? Well, I found myself minding my manners and my mannerisms. I lowered the tone of my voice, and I also lowered my hot pants that I was wearing at the time because I wanted to go be a thirst trap at Great Dane. Subconsciously trying to fold myself into a form of an existence that would hopefully not offend any bit or any piece of his sensibilities. Basically, and honestly speaking, my defense mechanism was coming across as masculine as possible to him. So this particular reflection is an important one to have because so often in the queer community, we often encourage and glorify strength. And on top of that, we are glorified for being strong. And strength, or different kinds of strengths, definitely has a place in our activism and in our lives as marginalized people. However, when faced with certain uncomfortable or threatening situations, we don't always know what to do or how to act or how to best protect ourselves. Queerness is a precarious identity to possess and to hold and to be and to embody. But then there was this like almost out of body experience, that moment where I decided to go beyond the pretext, go beyond the situation that I was seeing and experiencing and wanting to navigate that situation in a different way, because I found myself annihilating myself, really. Like, look at me trying to protect myself by erasing and annihilating myself. Look at me try to finish me off before I think he will. And that particular feeling or experience becomes more amplified and complex the further along in the spectrum of queerness you go. So imagine being black, queer, a woman or feminine, being differentially abled, physically or otherwise. How many anxieties you experience because of the various adversities you're just trying to protect yourself from. Yes. The second thing that required my reflection was the driver's attitude towards the conversation that we were having during our trip. Now, I'm not interested in placing any kind of value judgment on my driver's commitment or non-commitment to homophobia or non-homophobia or queerness or activism or anything of that sort. I'm more interested in making sense and meaning out of his ambiguous attitude towards queer people, because it means something. So Brothers was all for Prejudice Against Ingleba, the film must fall, but couldn't vouch for a queer person in the same way, a queer person who was sitting right next to him. His fence sitting was suspicious to me. And at first I thought, okay, I'm dealing with a hotep with undercover homophobic tendencies. And then I thought a little deeper. I thought, what if the context was different, where he was not the driver of a relatively reputable cab service, where I was not a client to be fetched from the burbs and dropped off in a location still within the cosmopolitan area, where I didn't get into the cab and certain aspects of my social and otherwise currencies would make a statement or statements about me before I could even say anything. What I'm basically trying to say is that space and the various signs and signals that implicitly tell someone else about the way we carry ourselves and show up in the world, all of those things matter, and they matter more than I think we think about or would like to admit. And I'm definitely not saying that had we been in a different context, then Ugai would have definitely pulled out a knife on me. And I'm also not saying that he's the type to pull out a knife on me in general. What I'm saying is that, again, space matters. Space, along with all the practices, patterns, beliefs, hierarchies, and all other contextual significances of that space, all of those things matter, as well as who you are, how you choose to show up in particular spaces, and how certain things about that space react towards you or respond to how you show up. All of those things matter. And I'm going to stay away from making any conclusive claims about the implications of being a certain body or being, or having certain elements of your identity in certain spaces, because it's all relative. Experiences are unique. But again, I'm gonna say it for like the 7th time. Space matters. And with that being said, I conclude today's episode. If you liked today's episode, click like, subscribe, and share, and comment, please. If you did not like this episode, I do not care. Like or dislike. Subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Thank you so much. Mwah. Bye.